And you mentioned that there's also been a link between the so-called furry fandom and the LGBT community. How deep does this connection go?
I think it goes very, very deep. And the reason why is this. Within the LGBTQRST, so what I would say within that movement, you probably have about 80 to 85% of young people that have been sexually abused. So these would be the survivors of the victims. They have sought shelter or they've sought community among these people because their gender has become confused. Well, how do you confuse a kid's gender? You violate, you override them. So you exploit them, you manipulate them, you groom them. And without pornography, the LGBTQ community doesn't exist. So these are kids that have been sexually groomed. They are being exploited because the question is, who introduced pornography to these kids? You have a smaller group of predators who are, much like a cult, manipulating these kids into what they even call a family or a community. Cults use the same idea, the same concepts, and the same methods. So they recruit these kids, and here's where the danger comes in. They're going to separate your kids from you. They're going to pull their kids to your kids toward them. So they will start to tell your kids that you don't understand, and that's why the community, are there. That's very much mental and emotional manipulation.
This is a trend that's becoming also popular in schools. Some teachers and school administrators say furries are becoming a growing and disturbing trend. What are they doing to prevent this situation?
Schools are being used as a grooming opportunity. What's called Soji Sex Ed, I know in the US and Canada, in other countries in Europe, the trans movement has along with it very deviant, meaning very sexually deviant, very pornography-filled sex education. It is in the schools now. Because predators know that if they can script the mind of kids, if they can implant ideas into them, then they're much more they are easier to manipulate. It sets them up for two things within the trans movement. It sets them up to not understand sexual boundaries because now adults have introduced concepts like bondage, like all these adult deviant activities. They've introduced these to kids. They've shown kids pictures. There's a lot of books that'll be introduced in schools under the idea that this is sex education. No, it's not. As a matter of fact, if the men, this is important to know, if the men in my sex offender treatment groups that I currently have, they're on probation and parole, if they were found in possession of one of those books, they would be kicked out of group and sent back to prison. That should raise real concerns because this is the kind of material that sexual predators use to groom kids. These other activities then, especially activities where men can hide their identity. You can hide your identity either through makeup, like a drag queen and put a wig on. You don't know who. If I were to put a wig on, I don't want to do that, but if I were to put a wig on and makeup, you wouldn't know who I am. So, and as a matter of fact, nobody checks the backgrounds of these men. But sexual predators oftentimes don't have any criminal history, and that's why they can work in schools. But especially the ones that are going to read to kids, nobody checks out their backgrounds. So these men are hiding their identity either through drag queens or through furries. And so these kids, oftentimes, and you have two primary populations within the trans movement. You have those kids that have been sexually abused, about 85%. The other is those kids on the autism spectrum. We used to call those computer geeks. We used to call these kids that are really into computers. These are kids, probably for different reasons, have a hard time socializing. These are the ones that are very brainy, but also sort of socially awkward, and they're very much into computers, which means they spend time online. And the one thing that a sexual abuse survivor and a young person on the autism spectrum, the one thing they have in common is they have a difficult time with their intuition, meaning they have a difficult time figuring out what they're feeling, which makes it very easy then for a manipulator to come along, and little by little, they're crossing boundaries, and where the average person or the average child would say, oh, he kind of seems creepy. For a sexual abuse survivor or a child on the autism spectrum, they don't think that as quickly. Well, predators know that, and so that's why they target those kids, and they will introduce them to these communities that allow predators to hide their identities. So that's Drag Queen Story Hour, that's furries, a lot of online gaming as well, and they're introducing it to schools. So when we see a young person, when we see a child dressing as a furry at a school, what you're going to find inevitably is an LGBTQ group at that school, an after-school group, or on the during lunch hour. What is that? They're being groomed. By the way, if your child comes home and starts using the terms they are non-binary, what does that mean? They're already being taught there's not just male and female. That's really important to know, because if your child comes home and says that, they're already being groomed into a cult. Cults have to get people to deny their intuition. We used to say in society, when certain things are almost self-evident, we would say, well, it's kind of like biology 101, meaning there's certain things right in front of our face. A man knows he's a man, a woman knows she's a woman. It's biology 101. Isn't it interesting that this group, the LGBTQ stuff, they've come to say what? That kids are born in the wrong body. So they're getting kids to not be able to even discern the most basic. Eventually, you will be able to get someone to believe you and follow you and do what you're suggesting to do, or what they are suggesting you do, and you won't question it, even to the point of girls will have their breasts removed, or boys will be castrated.
So how should parents approach this conversation with their children about the furry trend if they see that their children like this?
I would say first, firm, and not like in the trans movement term. Be positive, because on the surface it looks fun. And so I would reference Disneyland, but again, we've heard that there's a lot of pedophiles working at Disneyland as well. But if you go to sporting events, they have these mascots. And so I would say be lighthearted about it. Kind of find out what's of interest to your child. But little by little, if you're seeing your child, and if you're hearing them reference the term furries, now we got a different issue. So let's say the child references furries. You're going to have a conversation with them, because I'll tell you what, somebody's introduced that idea to them, and they're going somewhere. They're going to eventually begin to get your child to come to an activity. So at that point, I would say, so for instance, if it were my kids are older now, I would say, you know what, it looks great, but buddy, so let's say a boy, because they'll target a lot of boys as well, right? Autistic boys. Say, buddy, you know, it looks great, but tell me what you think about furries. So we're going to get the child talking, and what do you think about the people in there? Do you know there's people under those suits? Oh, you know, the kid's starting to clue in. Do we know anything about them? Well, even though it looks fun, do you know that there's actually some people that aren't nice, or aren't as nice as they want to come across? And there's some people that actually, unfortunately, want to kind of hurt kids. And because we don't know the adults in there, and you can actually, I'm stepping out of character for a moment, you can actually, parents, reference me as a point of reference, as far as you can say, you know, I heard from somebody that worked in a prison that some bad people have actually used furries to gain access to kids. And so, though it looks fun, because I'm your parent, I'm here to protect you. And we're going to make sure that we don't get involved with that group because we don't know who we're dealing with.
What are some hints parents should be aware of?
Your child. So I would recommend keep tabs on who your child is interacting with. It's hard, but we can't drop our guard down. We have to be vigilant. So I would say learn how to find out who your kid is texting, right? Anytime your child is interacting with someone, make sure you gotta be aware. And again, predators have no problem coming across like 8-year-old children, 13-year-old children. So you still never really know. So you need to be very mindful. In this day and age, we're going to have to kind of tell our kids, now not too much, but we have to tell them that there are some bad people out there that may seem friendly. Think about the book of Proverbs. It teaches us wisdom, it teaches us discernment. So that can be an opportunity also to help educate your child just as far as life, because there's plenty of people anyways that are out looking to take advantage of all of us. So how much more with kids? So online communities are filled with predators, unfortunately. So I'd be very mindful of online activities and communities and actual activities where adults seem very interested in spending time with kids. Also coaches, teachers, just anybody.
Jon Uhler, thank you very much for giving us your insight about this. Hope this is not the last time we have you on the show.
Well, thank you for having me. It's been a pleasure, and I'll look forward to talking next time.
¿Y usted qué opina sobre esta moda furry? ¿Cree que se debería concientizar más sobre este tema en las escuelas? Déjenos saber qué opina en los comentarios debajo. ¿Y quiere sugerirme algún tema o invitado para el programa? También cuénteme abajo en los comentarios. Los invito también a unirse a nuestro canal de Telegram para seguir conectados. Gracias por acompañarnos en Opinión Pública. Soy Pachi Valencia y nos vemos el próximo miércoles. Buenas noches.